Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Safer Arizona Wire. I'm your host, David Stephen Wisniewski.
And I'm Tom Dean, attorney for Cannabis.
It looks like the Smart and Safe initiative is making the ballot. If you're not familiar, it is a cannabis law reform initiative that makes 1 ounce legal, 6 plants legal, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And since it looks like it's making the ballot, the Prohibitionists have come out. They've emerged from their corners and they're making their voices heard. Doug Ducey slammed the Smart and Safe initiative, and we're going to go over some of those arguments and more. Also, there is a lawsuit trying to kick the Smart and Safe initiative off the ballot altogether. We're going to go over all that and more, but first, a message from our sponsor.
This edition of Safer Arizona Wire is sponsored by azmarijuana.com, Arizona's #1 marijuana industry website. azmarijuana.com is your top quality source of Arizona cannabis news and so much more. Bypass the online censors. Sign up for their email list so their content gets sent directly to your email. Bypass the social media shadow bans. Google search AZ Marijuana Facebook, like and follow their page so their content gets sent directly to your feed. Now, back to today's regularly scheduled broadcast.
Hi, I'm Tom Dean, attorney for Cannabis. You may know me from my work here in Arizona in important cannabis-related matters like the ASU campus ban case or the cannabis concentrates case, State v. Jones. I've been representing cannabis consumers for 26 years now, and for the last several years, I've been doing nothing but that, representing people in important criminal and DUI cases related to the use of marijuana. If you've got a case involving criminal charges, or if you're just looking for advice or wanting to enter the Arizona's cannabis industry, please give me a call. You can reach me at 602-635-4990, 602-635-4990, or visit me on the web at attorneyforcannabis.com.
All right, and we're back. I've got this article that goes over some of the garbage that Doug Ducey and other people are talking about. So first things first, Tom.
Yeah.
I'm going to read this off and tell me what you think.
All right.
It says, Doug Ducey claims we know from states that have fully legalized marijuana that it has real consequences. More deaths on highways caused by high drivers, dramatic increases in teen drug use, and more newborn babies exposed to marijuana. Tom, what do you got to say to that?
Well, let's take those one at a time. First of all, his first claim is that
deaths on highways.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, or NHTSA, which is the federal agency responsible for safety on our nation's highways, has done what's called a meta-study, the largest study of any other study on the effect of cannabis on driving behavior. And a meta-study is where they take all the studies that are out there, all of them, and they take them all together, and out of a survey of all those different studies, they then come to the conclusion that there's no greater risk of vehicular accidents, car accidents, resulting from cannabis use. So there's no correlation.
And in my experience, when people are driving stoned, they typically drive a little bit slower and look out for the cops. If anything, I would argue they're a little bit safer of drivers.
Well, that's true, and that's thought to be an autonomic response that's regulated by the endocannabinoid system. That every animal life form has an endocannabinoid system, and what that means is that we're wired to understand how to deal with cannabinoids, including THC. And so when the body detects an overabundance, for example, of cannabinoids, those receptors then will activate certain responses, which are not even conscious responses, but it causes a person to be more careful, drive more slowly, put more distance between their car and the car in front of them, and engage in other automatic safety measures so as to avoid the possibility that if they are impaired, it won't result in any kind of an accident. And so this is something that is the opposite, for example, of alcohol, where alcohol, you lose all inhibition and you tend to drive faster and more reckless when a person's under the influence of alcohol. With cannabis, it's the exact opposite. That's one of the reasons why they think that there's no correlation between cannabis use and driving accidents.
Well, next, they say there's going to be an increase in teen drug use, but not just an increase, a dramatic increase.
Yeah. Well, that's just simply not true. Now, I'll say this. In most jurisdictions that have legalized marijuana, and this has held true for decades now, there is an initial increase, usually in the first year or so after legalization, in teen use. This is probably because, curiosity, whatever. But then inevitably, after that short period of time, the levels drop off sharply and end up being less than they were when it was illegal. So it actually has the opposite effect of that. It will reduce, guaranteed this will reduce the number of teens who consume marijuana. And there's different reasons why we think that's the case. One of the more obvious ones is that it'll take away the prevalence of cannabis on the black market, because the only way that kids get, drug dealers don't typically ID, okay? So you've got someone it goes for any kind of substance. And so it's a lot easier. You ask any teenager, they'll tell you it's much easier to go and obtain cannabis than it is to go and obtain a bottle of whiskey or a six-pack of beer. It's much harder because that stuff is not generally available on the black market because it's legal. And there's no place for the black market. So same thing we would expect to see here. As the availability of cannabis on the black market shrinks, it'll be less available to kids. Obviously, no dispensary, no marijuana establishment is going to risk its lucrative license just because to score one sale for some underage person who comes into their dispensary without ID. That's just not going to happen.
Well, these prohibitionists love to use teenagers and children as their justification to continue prohibition. Moving forward, they say more newborns will be exposed to marijuana. Now, why would that even be?
Well, I think the question is not so much whether that'll happen. I think in some ways that's probably true. You've got, for example, if there are more women of childbearing years who choose to engage in the use of cannabis, and some of them do that maybe while they're pregnant, others may do that after the child's born and while they're nursing, that can cause cannabinoids to be transferred to the child. But that's not anything new. In fact, the oldest evidence that we have of cannabis use goes back 5,000 years ago. We know that human beings have been using cannabis, consuming cannabis for a lot longer than that. But the earliest proof that we have is a relief in India of a woman who's in the process of giving birth. And as she's doing that, she's consuming cannabis. So we know that children have been exposed to cannabis through their mothers for at least 5,000 years. And we don't have any evidence that that's ever caused any kind of a problem, health problem, physical, mental, developmental, or otherwise with any human child. There is a study out there that prohibitionists like to point to, which was done on rats, where they were forced to consume vast amounts of cannabis while these rats were pregnant. And they did think that they could see that there was some effect on brain development, although they weren't able to say whether it was a positive effect or a negative effect, nor can they say whether in the kind of moderate levels you would expect a human to consume cannabis, that would have any effect at all on a human child or fetus. So while there is this one lone study, it's certainly it at best means maybe we could do more studies, but in no way is it even close to being evidence that exposure to cannabis would actually cause harm to a child or to a newborn or to a fetus.
Well, they keep beating that dead horse. We got Senator Sen Kyrillos. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm not sure. I might have butchered that. But this Sen Kyrillos Republican wrote that she was deeply saddened by the prospect of how this initiative would harm children, and goes on to say kids would become easy prey for an industry hungry to create a new generation of users. Kyrillos argued nothing that legal products would include vape pens, edibles, gummies, cookies, candies, which she implied would appeal to children.
Well, again, first of all, like we were just talking about, there's not going to be anyone in the industry that's looking to sell, any kind of marijuana product to a child. There's going to be plenty of adults for them to sell to, and to risk losing their license over trying to sell to a minor. And if they tried to do it, they most certainly would be busted, because there's so many regulations in place and security measures and so forth that there's no way that if any marijuana establishment tried to do that they would get away with it. So that's just not going to happen.
And I just want to make a side note real quick. I mean, when it comes to the governor and these senators, sometimes it's hard to respond to them if you want to say something. But if you're all on Facebook, there's a couple of pages you can go to directly respond to the prohibitionists. Sheila Polk's Facebook page is Arizonans for Responsible Drug Policy. Now, there's two. One of them is actually a satire that's pro-marijuana. You got to find the one that's anti-marijuana. And then there's another one who's emerged recently. Her name is Andrea Kadar. And her page is Arizona Parents Concerned About Recreational Pot. So you can go to those pages, and every day they're posting videos and different memes about cannabis. Now, one of the things I think is funny is they say that they don't want to accept drug money for schools, but at the same time, they're upset that no money is going through K through 12. So which is it? Do you not want to accept the drug money, or do you want the money to go K through 12?
Right. And another thing there that you mentioned, I think it's important to point out that in the this new law, Smart and Safe initiative, all of the marijuana has to be sold in child-proof containers, and they also cannot be in the shape of animals or other cute things. They can't have animal names or names, I think, of like cartoon. They can't be look like cartoon characters. They can't do anything that might be appealing to children. So children won't be able to access them, and it's nothing that the children probably would want to access because the restrictions on how they can appear.
Well, here's one of my favorite questions, and if anybody ever runs into a prohibitionist, I encourage you to ask the same question just to see what kind of answer you would get. The question is, if you walked in on your child smoking a bowl of marijuana, would you call the police on your own child? And that implies that they would get arrested at gunpoint, be charged as a felon, maybe be convicted of a felony, maybe not, but definitely could end up with a criminal record for life over marijuana, and the parent being the one who triggered the phone call. Now, to me, if they say, yes, I'd call the cops on my kid, I think that's a bad parent. And then if they say, no, I wouldn't call the cops on my kid, it means they fundamentally don't agree with the prohibition and the laws that or the penalties within prohibition. So go ahead, ask the prohibitionist, would you call the cops on your own child if you caught them smoking marijuana? And I just want to see what they got to say.
You've got an example of
right. I asked Seth Liebson that question, and Seth Liebson was one of Sheila Polk's henchmen for number
famous all I think around the country, isn't he? As this
he's
traveling.
He's got a podcast. He's pretty. I've seen a not a billboard, but at a gas station, not a gas station, but a bus stop. You know how they have bus stop advertisements? I seen that guy's face right there when I was waiting for a bus one time. But I asked him if he would call the cops on his own kid if he caught them smoking marijuana, and he said, well, probably not. And then he tells us all these things he would go through instead, all these rehabilitation steps he would take before he would ever think it was necessary to call the police. And that's what I'm saying. If these prohibitionists won't call the cops on their own children, it means they fundamentally don't believe in the penalties associated with prohibition.
True.
And back to what we were talking about, we got this Sen Kyrillos still talking. The industry will succeed in hooking many of our kids and stealing their potential early. Do you think their potential will be stolen from the industry?
No, in fact, first of all, there's no evidence of that, but there is a lot of evidence that there are many people who find that the use of cannabis adds tremendously to their success, whether that's in science. One guy that comes to mind is Carl Sagan. Was a daily cannabis consumer, brilliant scientist. Many others, athlete. A lot of athletes obviously use cannabis. I mean, the NFL is all the professional sports are really loosening up because it's such a healthy alternative to more powerful prescription drugs. For dealing with pain and that sort of thing. And obviously for creativity, in artistic endeavors, I don't know that if I've ever met an artist that doesn't consume cannabis. So
it's very prevalent in the art industry.
If anything, I think there's a correlation that cannabis use can enhance a person's success. I haven't seen cases of it that it would actually, I don't know, cause a person to do poorly or
My
anything like that.
potential. Damn it.
I think that you can certainly have a person who's a cannabis consumer who maybe isn't motivated, but I think that you'll find if you really take a look at that, it's not so much the cannabis, it's just the person's attitude. He just happens to also be a cannabis consumer.
Well, that kind of goes into our next little snippet here, something that Sheila Polk was saying. But in my opinion, I don't think cannabis makes you unmotivated. I think sometimes people get depressed already and they're unmotivated because they're depressed and they decide to use cannabis. So I think the unmotivation and the depression came first, and then the cannabis is a treatment for it. And Sheila Polk has to say this. In Arizona, positive marijuana workplace tests have nearly tripled over the past 8 years since legalization of medical marijuana, and says Sheila Polk, an outspoken cannabis opponent. Workplaces with higher rates of drug use have employees that are less productive, suffer higher absenteeism, and have more accidents.
Yeah, she just made that up. There's no study. She doesn't. I'm not surprised she doesn't cite a study there because there isn't any study that would support those conclusions, to my knowledge. So if she's got one, I'd like to see her present it because then we could, take a look at it. And my guess is that it doesn't really say what she's claiming it says.
Well, I think these prohibitionists are all on drugs, or at least it seems like they're on drugs.
Prescription drugs.
I don't see their points, and I think that there's a lot of good counter arguments to everything they have to say. But let's move on to the next topic. They're trying to get this thing off the ballot altogether with a lawsuit, and it kind of reminds me in 2016. I remember there was a lawsuit against Prop 205, and it argued that the summary was misleading, and if I remember correctly, the judge threw it out and said the voters will decide if it's misleading when they go to vote.
Yeah, it was a similar challenge. Again, but I think that one was that after. I'm trying to remember the timing of that one.
They had already made the ballot, or they'd already turned in their signatures.
Yeah. So, I guess it was about the same stage as this we're at in this one, huh? That one didn't make it very far. Bottom line is that this is a democratic process, and we're not going to have these ballot initiatives thrown out for technical reasons. And I think part of that is much of the technical issues that they're talking about. This isn't part of this isn't like part of our Constitution. These are just rules and stuff that were made up by the legislature to try and regulate how the initiative process works. So there's nothing about the legislative summary or anything like that goes to the heart of the initiative process. Obviously, everyone can read the initiative for themselves. We expect that citizens are intelligent enough to do that. These people who filed this lawsuit obviously don't think that anyone's intelligent enough to read for themselves. They think all they can do is read this little legislative summary at the top, and that's what they base their vote on. I mean, I think that's insulting.
I encourage people to read the entire initiative and base your vote off the entire initiative.
Exactly. Now, secondly, speaking again, now that we're talking about this lawsuit, again, it is based on, the legislative summary is misleading. It, for example, the tax, just marijuana establishments are taxed like any other business, sales tax. So whatever the prevailing sales tax rate is, they're taxed at that rate. Plus, they're taxed an additional 16% on top of that, which is a huge tax.
Yeah, that sucks.
And they're complaining that it says 16%, but it doesn't say that 16% can't be increased. That's true. It can't be increased. But why would they have to say that? They're saying it allows for it requires.
Isn't that the point of a summary? You're just using little snippets.
Right. They're trying to say the summary needs to include every little detail. And I mean, another issue that they were complaining about, I think, was that besides the tax was that it doesn't provide, that it doesn't put voters on notice that marijuana includes the concentrate. So like hashish. So if you extract marijuana juice, if you will, that you're juicing marijuana. You're allowed to do that. It doesn't say specifically every little way that you can juice or extract or make marijuana, mix marijuana, cook marijuana, whatever you want to do with it. It doesn't go into all the detail about that, but the definition of marijuana itself is all-inclusive in the initiative. So for them to try to say that because the summary wasn't exhaustive, I mean, there might as well not be a summary then. You might as well just read the initiative, because I have a feeling that no matter how extensive the summary was, that the people who filed this lawsuit would find something that it didn't mention, that's in the initiative.
They would have done a lawsuit anyways.
And then claim that it's misleading in some way, but it's not.
Well, I'm going to try to get this video out as soon as possible, but it's probably going to be the 6th of August, and I think that is the same day that you have a more extensive discussion Zoom meeting about this topic. Is that correct?
Yeah. So META, August 6th, is having a panel of lawyers. I'm on that panel myself. We're going to get into discussing this lawsuit in a little more detail.
I'll be sharing that on this Facebook page too, so keep a lookout for that. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, yeah, I can tell you this. I don't think that this lawsuit has a chance. It's just another last-ditch attempt by prohibitionists, because they weren't able to get any funding this year. In 2016, they were pretty well funded. They had over $1 million to work with, and you probably saw their billboards and stuff like that.
They had babies with cookies, babies with gummies.
With a bite
they
out of
just
the
love
cookie.
to use those babies.
Yeah. So they don't have any money this year because, quite frankly, there's just not any interest in resisting legalization.
I don't know. I'm kind of feeling like they're probably going to end up getting money eventually. They just might not have any now.
But the problem is they know that all of the polling has indicated that at least 60% of Arizona voters or more favor legalization. So they know that they're going to lose if this thing goes to vote. So no matter whether they spent money or not.
So it's not worth the risk.
It's not worth, to be wasted money. And I think most people realize that. So the only way that they could try to attack this is by filing a lawsuit and somehow claiming that it's technically deficient in the way that it summarizes the terms.
Well, that's all I got. Tom, do you got anything else before we conclude this broadcast day?
No, other than, I know that we're going to be doing some more in-depth on the different aspects of the legalization initiative. So we've got a few shows coming up. We're going to try to keep them brief, definitely under 10 minutes on specific topics as we get closer and closer to that November date. So keep an eye out for those shows. I think you'll find them interesting, very succinct, and I know there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding out there that even I'm seeing amongst cannabis consumers who maybe don't think that this initiative goes far enough, or it's not good enough, or even that they're just misunderstanding its provisions. So I think that it's important that we go into depth and talk about those things.
All right, so there's a lot of good stuff coming up. Stay tuned for that next episode. Until next time, this was Dave Wisniewski
And Tom Dean, attorney for cannabis.
with Safer Arizona Wire. Thank you.